It was a quiet Sunday morning when my phone started ringing, and I saw my granddaughter Lily's name flashing on the screen. I smiled at first, thinking she wanted to tell me about her new painting or her school play, but the moment I heard her voice, something inside me froze. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her words. I asked her to slow down, but what she said next tore right through me. She whispered that her daddy was packing her suitcase and telling her they were going to meet her new mom. For a moment I couldn't even breathe. My son had never mentioned anything about getting remarried, and the thought of Lily being confused or scared like that made my heart ache in ways I didn't know were possible. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone trembling in my hand, trying to comfort her while my own tears started to fall. I didn't know what had happened to the man I raised, or how we had reached this point. But one thing was clear, something wasn't right. Where are you watching this video from? And what time is it there right now? Tell me in the comments. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at the sunlight that was falling across my bedroom floor. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on your chest. I could still hear Lily's small trembling voice echoing in my mind. She had said those words so softly, like she was scared of getting in trouble for even telling me. Daddy is taking me to a new mom. I tried to make sense of it, but my thoughts kept circling the same question over and over. What did she mean by that? Was he getting remarried? Was this some woman she barely knew? My son, Michael, had always been private about his relationships since the divorce, but I never imagined he would keep something this big from me. The clock on the nightstand said 9:17 a.m. I was supposed to meet a friend for coffee that morning, but I knew I couldn't go. My mind was somewhere else entirely, back in that house where my son lived with my granddaughter. I kept picturing Lily's face, her blonde curls always a little messy, the small dimple on her right cheek that showed whenever she smiled. She had just turned 7 last month. We had thrown her a little birthday party at my house, with pink balloons and chocolate cake. Michael had shown up late, distracted, and kept checking his phone. I had noticed a tension in his voice that day, but I told myself it was just work stress. Now I wondered if it had been something else. I reached for the phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Michael's name. I hesitated for a moment, unsure what I was even going to say. Part of me wanted to stay calm, to understand before reacting. But the other part, the mother part, was angry. Angry that he would let his daughter cry like that. Angry that I had to find out from Lily and not from him. When he finally picked up, his voice was flat, as if nothing unusual was happening. I told him that Lily had called me upset, that she said he was taking her somewhere. He sighed before answering, the kind of sigh that tells you someone doesn't want to talk. He said he was driving and would call me back later. That was all. He didn't deny it, didn't explain it, just ended the call. I sat there for a while, holding the phone in my lap, feeling that familiar ache in my chest that only a parent can understand. The ache of watching your child make choices that break your heart. I remembered the day Michael's wife, Anna, left. It had been almost 3 years now, but the wound never fully healed. They had been high school sweethearts, inseparable, the kind of couple everyone thought would last forever. But life had other plans. Anna had grown tired of the endless arguments and Michael's late nights. She had packed a bag one afternoon while he was at work, left a short note on the kitchen table, and drove away. After the divorce, I did everything I could to hold the pieces together for Lily. I babysat her every weekend, helped with school projects, and listened when she missed her mom. Michael threw himself into work, spending long hours at his office, barely home for dinner. Sometimes he would drop Lily off at my house and disappear for days, saying he had meetings out of town. I tried to talk to him about balance, about being there for her, but he always brushed it off. He said he was doing his best. I believed him, because that's what mothers do. We believe our children even when the truth is right in front of us. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything since morning. I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes down the street. The sight made me ache for simpler times, when Michael was a little boy running through sprinklers, coming home with scraped knees and muddy shoes. I thought about how sweet he had been as a child, always helping me in the kitchen, always hugging me goodnight. Somewhere along the way, that boy had become a man I barely recognized. I wondered when that change had happened. Was it after the divorce? After the stress of work? Or had it started long before, in the small cracks we never saw forming? Around noon, I decided to drive over to his house. It was only 20 minutes away, but the drive felt longer than usual. My hands were tight on the steering wheel the whole time. The closer I got, the heavier my heart felt. When I pulled into his driveway, I noticed a car I didn't recognize, a silver SUV parked near the garage. The blinds were half closed and I could see movement inside. For a moment I considered turning back, afraid of what I might find. But then I remembered Lily's tears, and that gave me courage. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Michael opened the door, surprised to see me. He looked tired, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled. Behind him, I could hear someone laughing softly, a woman's voice. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. I asked where Lily was. He said she was watching cartoons. I wanted to believe him, but his tone was distant, like he was talking to a stranger. I asked him directly if he was seeing someone new. He hesitated for a long moment before nodding. He said her name was Rachel. They had been together for almost a year. He said he was planning to introduce Lily to her properly because things were getting serious. I stared at him, unable to find words. A year, and he never told me. He tried to sound calm, but I could sense a defensiveness in his voice. He said he didn't tell me because he knew I'd worry or judge him. I told him I wasn't judging, I just wanted to understand. He looked away then, his eyes flicking toward the living room window. I followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of a woman with dark hair arranging flowers in a vase. She looked younger than Michael, maybe early 30s, wearing a bright yellow dress that didn't seem to belong in that quiet house. I felt a chill run through me, not because she was there, but because of how normal it all looked, as if they had already built a life together and simply forgot to tell me. When I left the house that afternoon, I didn't say much. I hugged Lily tightly, kissed the top of her head, and told her grandma loved her more than anything. She looked up at me with her wide blue eyes, still unsure of what was happening around her. On the drive home, I cried quietly, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other wiping tears that wouldn't stop. It wasn't just sadness, it was something deeper, a sense that I was losing my family one piece at a time, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual. I kept replaying the day over and over, wondering if I had missed some sign earlier, some clue that might have warned me. The hardest part wasn't that Michael was moving on. It was that he had done it in secret, shutting me out completely. And the thought of Lily being caught in the middle of all this, innocent, confused, and heartbroken, that was what hurt the most. As I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I made a quiet promise to myself. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I wouldn't let my granddaughter face it alone. Whatever it took, I was going to protect her, even if it meant confronting truths I didn't want to hear. The next morning, I woke up early, though I hadn't really slept much. My mind was restless, wandering back to the image of that woman in the yellow dress standing inside my son's house, arranging flowers as if she already belonged there. The way she moved, calm and comfortable, made it clear she wasn't just a visitor. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I even tasted it, staring at the steam fading into the air, thinking about everything Lily had said. I could still hear her little voice trembling as she told me Daddy said we're going to meet my new mom. It wasn't just a sentence, it was confusion, maybe fear, and a longing for something she didn't understand yet. Children sense things we adults like to pretend aren't happening, and I knew in my heart that something about this situation wasn't right. I decided to give Michael some space that day, though it wasn't easy. I thought maybe I should call him again, try to talk things through calmly, but a small part of me knew he would just avoid the conversation. He had always been that way, even as a teenager. Whenever life got complicated, he'd shut down and pull away instead of facing it. Still, he wasn't a bad man, just a lost one. And I couldn't stop caring, no matter how much it hurt to see the distance growing between us. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Lily. It was short, just a few words, but it made my stomach twist. It said, "Grandma, can I come stay with you soon?" I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the screen. I typed back, "Of course you can, sweetheart, anytime." But when I pressed send, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that there was more she wasn't saying. A few minutes later, Michael called. His tone was casual, almost forced. He said he'd seen that Lily texted me and wanted to explain. He said Rachel had been staying with them for a while, and he was trying to make things easier for Lily, to help her get used to the change. I listened quietly, but the more he spoke, the more it sounded like he was trying to convince himself that it was fine. I told him I understood that he wanted to move forward, that everyone deserves happiness, but I asked if he'd thought about how fast this might feel for Lily. There was a pause, and then he sighed. He said I was overreacting, that Lily was just a child and she'd adjust in time. The way he said it, so dismissive, so certain, made my heart sink. I wanted to remind him that love can't be forced, that you can't just tell a little girl who misses her mother that someone new will replace that space in her heart. But before I could, he said he had to go. He had a work call, and just like that, the line went dead again. I sat there in silence for a long while, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. I remembered when Michael was Lily's age, sitting at the kitchen counter doing homework while I cooked dinner. He used to ask endless questions about everything: how rainbows formed, why people got old, where dreams came from. He had such a curious heart, so full of wonder. And now, hearing his voice so cold, so distant, I wondered where that boy had gone. Maybe life had hardened him. Maybe the pain of losing Anna had built walls he didn't know how to take down. But that didn't excuse what he was doing to Lily. That evening, as the sun began to set, I decided to call Anna. We hadn't spoken much since the divorce. There had been tension at first, blame, misunderstandings, things better left in the past, but I knew she still loved her daughter deeply. When she answered, her voice sounded tired but kind. I told her I hoped it was okay that I called, and she said of course it was. I explained what had happened, how Lily had called me crying, how Michael was introducing her to someone new. There was a long silence on the other end, and then I heard Anna's voice crack slightly as she asked, "Did he tell you who she is?" I said yes. Her name was Rachel. Anna was quiet again, and I could tell from the tone of her breathing that she knew something I didn't. I asked gently if she'd heard of her before. She said yes, that Rachel used to work at the same company as Michael. Apparently, they had been close long before the divorce was final. I felt my stomach twist as the pieces began to fit together in the worst possible way. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew what that meant. It explained his secrecy, his silence, the late nights. I didn't tell Anna what I was thinking, but she must have sensed it. She just said softly, "Please, promise me you'll look after Lily." After the call ended, I sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the crickets chirping in the distance. The air was cool and still, but my thoughts were racing. If what Anna said was true, then this woman in the yellow dress wasn't just a new girlfriend. She might have been part of the reason the marriage ended. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but the ache in my chest told me I already knew. And what broke me the most was imagining how Lily must be feeling, being told to smile and accept someone who might have helped tear her family apart. That night, I couldn't rest. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message from Lily. Around midnight, I finally drifted off, only to wake to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was a text again, from Lily. She said, "Grandma, Daddy's mad because I told you. Please don't tell him I called." My heart sank reading those words. She was protecting me when I should have been protecting her. I typed back quickly, "It's okay, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. I love you." I spent the next day thinking about what to do. I didn't want to make things worse by confronting Michael again, but I couldn't stand by and watch my granddaughter become a casualty in the quiet war between adults. So, I decided to wait, to watch, and to listen. Sometimes, silence reveals more than words ever can. Later that week, I drove by Michael's neighborhood just to see if everything looked okay. I told myself it was just to check in, but I knew it was more than that. As I passed the house, I saw Rachel's car in the driveway again, and through the open window, I saw her sitting with Lily at the kitchen table. For a moment it looked almost normal, two people laughing, maybe coloring or baking cookies. But something about Lily's body language felt off. Her shoulders were slumped, her smile uncertain. I could tell she was trying to be polite, but her eyes didn't have the sparkle they used to. I drove home that day with a heavy heart. I realized I couldn't protect Lily from everything, but I could be her safe place. I could make sure that no matter what happened inside that house, she always knew there was one person in the world who would never let her down. And in that quiet moment, as I pulled into my driveway and looked at the fading sunset, I made another silent promise. I would not interfere, not yet, but I would be ready for whatever truth was waiting to come out. A week passed, and I tried to keep myself busy, but it was impossible to shake the unease that had settled inside me. Every morning I'd wake up hoping there would be a message from Lily, something small and sweet to reassure me she was okay. Sometimes there was. She'd send pictures of her drawings or her school lunch, little things that seemed ordinary but meant everything to me. Yet between those small moments of light, there were also long silences, hours, sometimes days, where I heard nothing at all. That quiet scared me more than anything, because I knew my granddaughter, and she was not a quiet child. One afternoon, I decided to visit her school. It wasn't planned. I just felt this strong pull, like something was telling me to go. When I arrived, I waited outside the gates until classes ended, watching as children ran out laughing, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Then I saw her, Lily, walking slowly, her little hand clutching her backpack strap, her eyes scanning the crowd. When she spotted me, her face lit up for a second before she looked around nervously, as if afraid someone might see. I waved and smiled, and after a hesitant pause, she ran into my arms. The moment I hugged her, I felt it, that subtle tension in her small body, like she was carrying more than a 7-year-old should ever have to. I knelt down and asked how she was. She said she was fine, but her eyes darted to the side when she spoke. I could tell she wasn't. I asked gently if her daddy knew I was here. She shook her head quickly. I told her it was okay, that Grandma just wanted to see her. We sat on a nearby bench under a tree, and I pulled out the small box of cookies I had brought for her. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen in days, and took one. I told her she could talk to me about anything, that Grandma's house was always a safe place. She looked down at her shoes, kicking at the dirt, before whispering something that made my heart twist. She said, "Daddy gets mad when I talk about Mommy." I asked what she meant, and she told me that whenever she mentioned her mom, Rachel would get quiet, and Daddy's voice would change. He'd tell her not to bring up the past, that they were moving forward as a family now. I tried to keep my voice steady, but inside I was burning with sadness. No child should ever be told to forget their mother. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and told her it was okay to miss Mommy, that love doesn't stop just because grown-ups change. She nodded slowly, then rested her head on my shoulder. We stayed that way for a while, watching the other children leave with their parents, until her teacher came by to say hello. When I dropped Lily off at Michael's house later, Rachel was the one who opened the door. She smiled politely, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of discomfort, maybe even guilt. She thanked me for bringing Lily home, and I could hear Michael's voice from inside the living room. I asked if he was around, and she said he was on a work call. I nodded and turned to leave, but before I could step off the porch, Lily suddenly hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "Don't forget me, Grandma." Those words stayed with me all night, looping in my mind like an echo I couldn't silence. That weekend, Michael called again. His tone was sharp this time, defensive. He said he didn't appreciate me showing up at Lily's school without asking. I told him calmly that I wasn't trying to interfere, that I only wanted to see my granddaughter. He accused me of confusing her, of making things harder by clinging to the past. For a moment, I almost raised my voice, but then I caught myself. I realized arguing with him wouldn't change anything. He was too deep in whatever story he had told himself about moving on. So, I said nothing more than this: "I love you, Michael, and I love Lily. That's all that matters to me." He didn't respond. The silence on the line felt heavier than any words could have been. That night, I sat on the porch again, the same spot where I used to rock Michael to sleep when he was a baby. I remembered how he would grip my finger with his tiny hand, how he'd cry if I walked away even for a second. And now, decades later, I was the one crying quietly, feeling like the distance between us had become an ocean. I kept wondering where I had gone wrong as a mother. Maybe I had been too soft, too forgiving, too willing to smooth things over instead of confronting them. Or maybe this was just what life did. It changed people, slowly, quietly, until you barely recognized them anymore. The next morning, I decided to visit the church where I sometimes volunteered. I needed to clear my mind, to feel grounded again. As I arranged flowers by the altar, one of the ladies, Mrs. Thompson, asked if I was okay. She said I looked tired. I told her a little about what was happening. Not all the details, just that my son was making choices I didn't understand, and my granddaughter was caught in the middle. She nodded softly and said something that stuck with me. She said, "Sometimes we can't protect our children from falling, but we can make sure they have a safe place to land." Those words comforted me more than she could have known. Later that evening, as I was finishing dinner, my phone buzzed again. It was a video call from Lily. I smiled as soon as I saw her face, but the background caught my attention immediately. She was sitting in her room, the light dim, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. I asked what was wrong, and she hesitated before saying quietly, "Daddy and Rachel are fighting again." My stomach tightened. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded, though her lip trembled. She said they were downstairs, and she could hear them yelling. I told her to lock her door and stay on the call with me until things calmed down. I stayed on the line for almost an hour, talking about her favorite cartoons, her friends, anything to keep her distracted. When the shouting finally stopped, I heard a door slam in the distance, and Lily flinched. She whispered that Rachel had left the house. I told her everything would be okay, but inside, I knew this was far from over. Something was breaking inside that home, not just between two adults, but within a child's sense of safety and trust. I wished I could reach through the screen, hold her, and tell her none of this was her fault. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at my reflection in the window. The quiet house around me felt colder than usual. I thought about calling Michael again, but I knew he wouldn't answer. I thought about calling Anna, but I didn't want to worry her more. So instead, I made myself another promise that I would start keeping notes, documenting everything, every call, every message, every tear. Not out of anger, but out of love. Because if one day this all fell apart, someone had to speak for the child in the middle of it. Someone had to be the voice that refused to be silenced. And as I turned off the kitchen light that night, I whispered a prayer, not for my son to change, not for the past to return, but for the strength to do what was right, even if it meant standing alone. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to settle back into my normal routine, but nothing about life felt normal anymore. Every morning when I woke up, the first thing I did was check my phone, hoping for a text or a missed call from Lily. Sometimes there would be a heart emoji or a short message saying, "Good morning, Grandma, I miss you." Those little moments felt like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds, but they also reminded me how much she needed someone to hold on to, and how helpless I was from the outside. I wanted to protect her, but I also didn't want to drive Michael further away. I was walking a tightrope between love and silence. One Friday afternoon, I decided to stop by Michael's house unannounced. It wasn't something I planned. It was more like instinct. Something in my heart told me I needed to see them. I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, Lily's favorite, and drove over just before sunset. When I pulled up, I noticed that the silver SUV was gone, which I assumed meant Rachel wasn't home. I took a deep breath and walked up the porch steps. Michael opened the door, looking surprised but not exactly happy to see me. I told him I'd brought cookies for Lily and asked if she was around. He hesitated before saying she was upstairs doing homework. I asked if I could say a quick hello, and after a moment, he nodded. As I walked up the stairs, I heard Lily's soft humming coming from her room. When I knocked lightly on her door, she turned around with a bright smile that melted my heart. She ran into my arms, holding on tightly like she hadn't seen me in years instead of days. I told her I'd missed her and that I brought cookies. She giggled and said, "You always make the best ones, Grandma." For a few moments everything felt peaceful again, the way it used to be when life was simple and love was easy. As Lily showed me a picture she had drawn for school, I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under one of her notebooks. It wasn't my business to look, but when she handed it to me shyly, saying, "I wrote this at school," my curiosity grew. It was a letter addressed to Mommy in heaven. My heart squeezed painfully as I read the first lines. She had written that she missed her mom every day, that she wished she could tell her about her new teacher, her favorite color, and how sometimes she felt sad even when she tried to smile. And then came a line that broke me completely. She wrote, "Daddy says Mommy isn't coming back, but sometimes I hear him whisper her name when he thinks I'm asleep." I looked up at Lily, unsure what to say. She was watching me carefully, her little eyes full of questions. I told her it was a beautiful letter, that Mommy would be proud of her. She asked if she could send it somehow, and I said maybe we could go to the park next weekend and let the wind carry it for her. She smiled at that, like it was the best idea in the world. I kissed her forehead and told her she was the bravest girl I knew. When I went downstairs, Michael was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. I sat across from him and said gently that Lily had written a letter to her mom. He looked up briefly, his expression tightening. He said he wished she'd stop living in the past, that he was trying to build a new life for both of them. I told him children don't just move on because adults decide to. He sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. He said Rachel was good for Lily, that she was trying hard to be patient. I didn't want to argue, so I just nodded, though inside I was screaming. Before I left, I placed the cookie box on the table and told him I was always there if he needed help. He gave me a brief nod, already looking back at his phone. As I walked toward the door, something caught my eye, an open envelope sitting on the counter, half hidden under some mail. The handwriting looked unfamiliar. Without meaning to pry, my eyes caught a few words at the top, regarding custody arrangement. My stomach turned cold. I didn't read further. I didn't have to. The meaning was clear enough. Michael wasn't just moving forward, he was making plans that might change everything. On the drive home, my hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Custody arrangement. The words replayed over and over, like an alarm I couldn't turn off. Why would he need to change custody? He already had primary care since the divorce. Unless he was planning something bigger. The thought made my chest tighten. Was he thinking of moving? Was he trying to limit Anna's rights? I didn't want to believe he would do something that cruel, but I also couldn't ignore what I had seen. That night, I called Anna again. It took her a while to answer, and when she did, I could hear exhaustion in her voice. I told her what I had found, carefully, not wanting to sound dramatic, and she went completely silent for almost a minute. Then she said quietly that she had received a lawyer's letter that week, but she hadn't opened it yet because she was scared of what it might say. My throat tightened as I asked her to open it while I stayed on the line. I listened to the sound of paper tearing, followed by her sharp intake of breath. She said Michael was filing for full custody, claiming she was unstable and had abandoned Lily. I closed my eyes, trying to process it. I told her we both knew that wasn't true. She had left a bad marriage, not her daughter. But in court, truth isn't always enough. We both knew Michael had resources, money, and connections. Anna didn't. She sounded broken, whispering that she couldn't lose Lily. I promised her she wouldn't, that I'd help however I could. Even as I said it, I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew I had to do something. The next day, I wrote everything down, every date, every call, every sign that Lily was unhappy. I didn't know if it would matter, but it felt like the only thing I could do. I even printed out our text messages, the ones where she asked to come stay with me, the ones that showed her fear. It wasn't about taking sides anymore. It was about making sure my granddaughter's voice wasn't lost in the noise of adult pride. That evening, I got another call from Lily. She was whispering again, her voice trembling. She said Daddy was mad because Mommy talked to Grandma. My heart raced as I asked if he had yelled. She said no, but he slammed the door and told her to go to her room. I told her to breathe, to stay calm, and that Grandma loved her. Before hanging up, she said something that chilled me to the bone. She said Rachel told her soon they'd move to a new house, and maybe Grandma wouldn't visit as much anymore. After she hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, the house around me still and heavy. I realized then that the woman in the yellow dress wasn't just part of a new chapter in Michael's life. She was trying to rewrite the whole story, one where there was no room left for the past, and maybe not even for me. That night, as the wind howled outside my window, I looked up at the old family photo on my dresser, Michael at 8 years old, grinning with missing teeth, standing beside me and his father. I whispered softly to that picture, promising that no matter what came next, I wouldn't let my granddaughter disappear into someone else's version of love. Not while I was still breathing. The days that followed felt like walking through thick fog. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, half hoping it would be Lily and half dreading what new pain might come through the line. I hadn't spoken to my son, Daniel, since the day Lily called me crying. He hadn't returned my messages, and each hour of silence carved deeper worry into my heart. One evening, I finally gathered enough strength to drive to his house myself. The sun was setting, washing the street in soft orange light, and for a moment it reminded me of the evenings when Daniel used to run around the yard with Lily, laughing so freely that even the neighbors smiled. But now the windows of his home were dark, curtains drawn, and the driveway empty except for Lily's small pink bicycle leaning against the porch railing. It was covered in dust as if no one had touched it in weeks. I sat in my car for a while, staring at that little bike, and something inside me broke. I thought about how quickly joy can turn into distance, how love can shift into something unrecognizable. I couldn't understand what had gone so wrong between us. Finally, I got out of the car and walked to the porch, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked softly at first, then louder when no one answered. Just as I was about to leave, the door opened a few inches, and there stood a woman I had never seen before. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with carefully styled hair and tired eyes that didn't quite meet mine. I asked if Daniel was home, and she hesitated for a moment before saying he had gone to the grocery store. Her voice was polite but distant, and she didn't invite me in. I could see behind her, the living room that used to smell of Lily's crayons and Daniel's coffee now felt cold and rearranged, as if someone had tried to erase all signs of the life that once filled it. On the wall where Lily's drawings used to hang, there were now framed photos of the new woman and Daniel smiling together, holding hands on a beach I didn't recognize. I felt my knees weaken as I realized what I was looking at. I asked about Lily, and her expression softened for just a second. She said Lily was upstairs, taking a nap. Then, almost apologetically, she added that Daniel thought it was best to give Lily some time to adjust to their new life. That phrase, new life, hit me like a wave of cold water. I wanted to shout, to tell her this wasn't a new life. It was a replacement, a rewriting of something sacred. But instead, I just nodded, my throat tightening. I thanked her and turned away, afraid that if I stayed any longer, my heart would completely give out. As I walked back to my car, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned, and there was Lily standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes and holding her stuffed rabbit. She looked smaller somehow, like the light had gone out of her. When she saw me, her face lit up for a split second before the woman gently pulled her back inside. I froze, helpless, watching the door close between us. That image stayed with me long after I drove away, my granddaughter reaching out while someone else decided when and how she could love me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind, every word Daniel had said over the years that now seemed to carry hidden meanings. I remembered the months after his divorce from Emily, Lily's mother, how he had grown distant and restless. I had thought it was just grief, but now I saw the signs of something else, a man trying to rebuild his life without looking at the ruins he left behind. I wondered who this new woman was, what kind of love had made him shut me out, and most painfully, I wondered what Lily was being told, how she was being made to understand this new mom. The next morning, I drove to the small diner where Daniel used to take Lily every Saturday. I sat by the window, waiting, hoping he might still come out of habit. Hours passed, and I almost gave up when I saw him walk in, his hand resting on the new woman's shoulder. They ordered coffee, laughed softly, and for a moment I couldn't tell if I was angry, heartbroken, or just tired. I approached their table slowly, my steps steady despite the storm inside me. Daniel looked up, surprised, and for a second, the boy I raised flickered behind his guarded eyes. We talked quietly, surrounded by the hum of clinking cups and distant chatter. I asked him why he hadn't told me about his new relationship, why Lily had to find out through confusion and tears. He sighed, saying he didn't want to complicate things, that Lily needed stability, and that he was trying to move forward. His words were careful, almost rehearsed. The woman stayed silent, looking down at her coffee. I could feel the gap between us widen with every sentence. I told him softly that moving forward doesn't mean erasing the people who love you. He didn't respond. When I left the diner, I realized I couldn't make Daniel listen, not yet. But I could still reach Lily, even if it had to be from a distance. I decided to start writing her letters, one every week, filled with little memories, bedtime stories, and gentle reminders that her grandma was always there, no matter what anyone said. I mailed the first one that night, sealing it with trembling hands but a steady heart. Something deep inside me shifted that day. I stopped waiting for Daniel's permission to love my granddaughter. I knew the truth now, that Lily wasn't being taken to a new mom, she was being taken into a world where love had conditions. And I couldn't allow that to be the end of our story. Every evening became a ritual. I would make a cup of chamomile tea, sit by the old wooden desk near the window, and take out my floral stationery. Then I'd write to Lily. I didn't start the letters with heavy words or sadness. Instead, I began each one like a small window into warmth. I told her about the birds that nested in my backyard again this spring, how the old oak tree had new blossoms, how the neighbor's cat kept stealing my knitting yarn. I wrote the things a child should read before bedtime, soft, steady, full of love. Then, gently, I slipped in reminders. I wrote that family doesn't disappear when someone new comes in. That love can stretch, but it never breaks. That no matter what happens, she would always have a place where she belonged completely. At first, I didn't know if she ever got those letters. I didn't hear anything back. But each week, I mailed another one, dated and numbered, because something told me Lily would need to read them one day, if not now, then later when she was old enough to remember who I was beyond what anyone told her. Writing became my anchor. It gave me peace in a storm I couldn't control. I kept her childhood alive in ink, her first dance recital, the time we baked cookies and burned half the batch, the day she fell asleep on my lap while we watched cartoons. 2 months passed before I got my answer. It came in the form of a small envelope, shaky handwriting on the front, and a heart drawn next to my name. I sat down before opening it, hands trembling. Inside was a short note written in purple crayon. It said, "Grandma, I miss you. I got your letters. Daddy said I can't send you pictures, but I drew one instead." And beneath those words, there was a drawing of the two of us sitting under the big oak tree, holding hands. Tears filled my eyes so fast I could barely see the paper. That little drawing told me everything I needed to know, she remembered. She still felt me close, even through the distance they tried to build. From that moment, I knew what my quiet mission would be. I would never fight loudly or publicly. I wouldn't call lawyers or demand rights. Instead, I would build a bridge with paper and ink. I would pour my heart into every word. So one day when Lily looked back, she'd have a trail that led straight to love, not bitterness. I began adding stories from my youth, about how her father used to get in trouble for sneaking cookies, how he once hid under the bed after painting the dog blue, how he laughed so hard that even I couldn't scold him. I wanted her to see her dad as I once saw him, a boy full of light, not the man who had turned distant. But then something unexpected happened. One morning, a letter came back unopened, with a red stamp on the corner that said "Return to sender." My heart dropped. I went to the post office, and they confirmed the address was no longer valid. Daniel had moved again without telling me. That night, the silence in my house felt heavier than ever. It was as if my words had been cut off midair. For the first time in months, I felt completely powerless. I sat by the fireplace, staring at the stack of letters still on my desk, and I asked myself if I should stop. Maybe this was a sign to let go. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. Love doesn't stop because it hits a wall. It finds new ways to reach through. So, I started writing again, even if the letters never left my home. I wrote them anyway, kept them in a wooden box with Lily's name carved on it. I called it the box of someday, because someday, she would be old enough to come looking for her truth. Weeks turned into months, and one afternoon, while I was watering the garden, a silver car pulled into my driveway. My heart raced when I saw Daniel step out. He looked tired, thinner, and older than I remembered. For a long moment, we just stood there, unsure how to begin. Then he spoke softly, saying Lily had been asking for me again, that she cried when she saw my letters stopped arriving, that she kept the first ones hidden under her pillow. His voice broke a little when he said she still drew pictures of the oak tree and me. I listened quietly, my tears falling silently into the soil. He apologized in that uneasy way men do when they don't know how to face their own guilt. He said life got complicated, that he was trying to hold everything together for Lily's sake. I didn't say much. I simply told him that I never stopped loving him or his daughter. Then I walked inside and brought him the box, all the letters I had written but never sent. He held it for a long time, then whispered that maybe it was time for Lily to see them. When they left, I watched the car disappear down the road, my heart beating with both hope and fear. That night, I imagined Lily opening that box, unfolding those letters, seeing the handwriting she once traced with her little fingers. Maybe she would finally understand that even when people leave, love can still find its way back. And though I didn't know what would happen next, for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Because I realized something deeper than anger or grief, that sometimes, our quiet love speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It was a Saturday morning when my phone rang again, and this time, it wasn't Lily's tiny voice trembling with fear. It was Daniel. His tone was different, soft, uncertain, as if each word was being chosen carefully. He asked if he and Lily could come by that afternoon. My breath caught and I had to sit down. It had been nearly a year since I'd last seen my granddaughter up close. I said yes, of course, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was fluttering like it hadn't in years. The rest of that morning passed in a blur. I made Lily's favorite cookies, cleaned the porch, and laid out her old blanket on the couch, the one she used to wrap herself in while we watched cartoons. Every small detail felt sacred. When I finally saw their car pull into the driveway, it felt like time paused. Lily jumped out first, her hair longer now, her steps hesitant but eager. Daniel followed, slower, carrying a box, the one I had given him, the one filled with letters that had carried my soul across all those silent months. Lily saw me and stopped for a second as if she needed to make sure I was real. Then she ran, and I barely had time to kneel before she threw herself into my arms. I held her so tightly that I could feel her heartbeat against mine, fast and warm and alive. I whispered that I missed her every day, and she said she knew, that she had read every letter, every single one. Daniel stood a few feet away, watching us. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Humility. He walked closer and placed the box on the porch table. He said Lily wanted to bring it back to where it began. Then, in a voice that cracked in the middle, he said he was sorry, not just for the silence, but for the way he had tried to build a life by cutting out the pieces that made him uncomfortable. He admitted that the new relationship hadn't worked out, that he had been trying too hard to replace what was lost instead of healing what was broken. His words weren't perfect, but they were honest, and that was all I needed. We spent that afternoon together, the three of us. Lily wanted to show me the drawings she made from my letters, scenes of the garden, the oak tree, the birds, even the old diner where her daddy and I used to take her on Sundays. Each drawing was a small piece of her heart stitched back to mine. At one point, Daniel excused himself to make a call, and I watched Lily play with the cat in the yard. The sun touched her face, and I thought of how children somehow carry light even through storms they don't understand. She turned and waved at me, her smile so pure it made every sleepless night worth it. Later, when we sat at the kitchen table, Daniel asked if he could show Lily the house where he grew up, the attic, the backyard swing, the photo albums we hadn't opened in years. I agreed, and as I watched them together, I could see something softening in him. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe guilt turning into tenderness. Whatever it was, I saw a spark of the boy I once raised, the one who used to promise he'd never let anything hurt his mom. Before they left, Lily hugged me again and whispered something that made my eyes sting. She said she didn't need a new mom anymore. She already had people who loved her enough. Then she looked at Daniel and said softly that she hoped he loved me too. The way she said it, so innocent, so honest, made Daniel turn away for a moment. When he faced me again, there were tears in his eyes. He said he did love me. He just forgot how to show it. That evening, after they drove away, I sat on the porch under the same sky that had witnessed all my heartbreak. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt open. I realized that sometimes, love doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, it only needs to stay, quietly, persistently, through every season. That visit didn't solve everything. There were still wounds to heal, conversations yet to happen, trust to rebuild. But something had shifted in both of them, and in me too. I no longer carried anger in my chest, only peace and a deep gratitude that the story wasn't over. That night, I wrote one last letter to Lily. It wasn't about the past this time. It was about the future, about how she should grow up knowing that love can survive mistakes, silence, and even distance. I told her that her daddy was learning, just like we all do, and that forgiveness isn't weakness but strength in its gentlest form. Then I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it back into the wooden box. This time, I labeled it the beginning. A few weeks passed after that visit, and life began to find a quiet rhythm again. Daniel started calling every few days, sometimes just to ask how I was doing, sometimes to tell me little things about Lily, how she had joined a painting class, how she was doing better at school, how she still talked about our afternoons under the oak tree. I didn't push for more, I just listened. I had learned that love grows best when you stop trying to force it. But one Friday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Lily called me herself. Her voice was soft and a little nervous, the kind of tone that told me she had something important to say. She asked if she could spend the weekend with me, just the two of us, like before. I didn't hesitate. Of course, I told her. My heart smiled before my lips did. When I picked her up from Daniel's house, she came running out with her little backpack and that same stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 4. She looked taller, older, but her eyes were still the same, curious, full of light. Daniel hugged her goodbye and told me he'd pick her up Sunday evening. The ride home was quiet at first, the way it sometimes is when someone has too many thoughts and doesn't know where to start. Then, halfway through, Lily turned to me and said she had a secret. She asked if she could tell me, but only if I promised not to get mad at her dad. I told her she could tell me anything, and I meant it. When we got home, I made us grilled cheese sandwiches and hot chocolate, and we sat by the window as the rain began to fall outside. Lily looked down at her mug for a long time before finally whispering that she had met the woman her daddy was going to marry, the so-called new mom. My heart tightened, but I stayed silent, letting her continue. She said the woman wasn't mean, but she didn't seem happy either. That she smiled only when Daniel was looking, and that sometimes, when she thought no one noticed, she cried in her car. Then Lily said something that made my hands tremble. She said her daddy had told her not to talk about it, that he wanted to protect everyone's feelings. But Lily didn't understand why she had to keep secrets about people being sad. I took a deep breath and told her gently that grown-ups sometimes get lost in their own storms, and they forget that children can see everything more clearly than they do. I told her that it's not her job to fix anyone, not even her daddy, and that she should never feel guilty for being honest about her feelings. She nodded slowly, then leaned against my shoulder, quiet for a while. After a few minutes, she said she had another secret. This time her voice cracked a little. She said her dad had been crying too, at night, when he thought she was asleep. She said he looked at the letters and said he wished he could start over. Those words hit me harder than I expected. All the anger I once held for Daniel melted into something softer, sorrow, understanding, maybe even forgiveness. I realized that beneath all his mistakes, he was still the same boy I once comforted after nightmares, the same soul trying to find his way back to peace. I hugged Lily and told her that sometimes adults make big messes trying to do what they think is right, but what matters most is that they find their way back to love. That night, after Lily fell asleep on the couch, I sat watching her breathe. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled like wet earth and possibility. I thought about how children carry the truth like mirrors. They reflect what's real, even when adults try to hide it. I decided right then that I would talk to Daniel again, not to argue or accuse, but to finally lay everything bare. I wanted to end the silence that had weighed on us for so long. The next morning, Lily woke up early and went out to play in the yard while I made pancakes. She drew pictures in the dirt with a stick, humming softly. When she came back in, she handed me a little paper heart she had cut out from an old magazine. On it, she had written, "Family always finds a way." I didn't know where she heard those words, but they felt like a message sent straight from something greater than both of us. When Daniel came to pick her up that evening, I asked him to stay for coffee. At first, he looked uneasy, but then he nodded. Lily went to her room to pack her bag, and I told him what she had shared. He didn't deny any of it. He just sat there, staring at his cup, his jaw tightening. Then, in a low voice, he said he was ending things with the woman, that he realized he was trying to fix loneliness by pretending it was love. He looked up at me with red eyes and said he missed being a son, not just a father. In that moment, I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. I didn't lecture him. I didn't remind him of the pain he caused. I simply said that families are like threads, even when they tangle, they're still connected. And that Lily's love had pulled us all back together. He nodded, and for the first time, I saw peace in his face. That night, as they drove away, I felt something settle quietly in my heart. Lily's secret had done more than reveal pain. It had opened a door to healing. And deep down, I knew our story was finally turning toward light. The morning Daniel came home started like any other, soft sunlight spilling through the curtains, the smell of coffee drifting through my kitchen, and the faint chirping of birds outside. I was watering the plants by the window when I heard a car door close in the driveway. I looked out, and there he was, standing beside his car with a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. There was something different in his posture, something quieter. Not the proud, defensive son who used to come by out of obligation, but a man who looked tired of running from his own heart. I opened the door before he even knocked. He smiled faintly, that kind of uncertain smile people wear when they don't know if they're welcome. I told him to come in, and he stood in the hallway for a long moment, taking in the scent of home, cinnamon, soap, and the faint trace of the candles I always burned when I was missing him. He looked around, noticing the little changes I'd made over the years, new curtains, fresh paint on the walls, a few new photos of Lily framed along the staircase. Then he said softly that it felt strange being back, like time had been paused here waiting for him. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd had so many breakfasts back when he was a boy. He told me he had ended things with the woman a few weeks earlier, that it had been painful but necessary. He said she was kind, but their relationship had been built on fear of being alone, fear of feeling broken, fear of facing the truth about what he had done to his own family. As he spoke, I realized how much courage it takes to admit that kind of truth out loud. He wasn't blaming anyone anymore. He was just telling the story as it was, without trying to make himself look better. Then he reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a small wooden box, the same one that had once carried my letters. But this time, it was filled with something new. He opened it and showed me a collection of drawings, notes, and little trinkets Lily had made. She had labeled the box The Story of Us. Inside were her drawings of the three of us, Amy, her, and Daniel, sitting under the oak tree, baking cookies, decorating the Christmas tree, feeding the birds. Each picture was like a small patch in a quilt made of love and memory. I traced my fingers over the paper, feeling tears gather behind my eyes. Daniel said that Lily had been asking questions about family lately, about what makes people stay, what makes them drift apart, and why love sometimes hurts but doesn't disappear. He said she told him she wanted everyone to live close again, so no one would have to miss each other anymore. I laughed softly through my tears and told him that children have a way of saying what adults are too proud to admit. He smiled at that, then looked down, his voice trembling as he said he was moving back to town. He wanted to be near family again, to rebuild what had been broken, not just for Lily, but for himself too. We spent that afternoon together, talking like we hadn't in years. He told me about his struggles, the sleepless nights, the guilt that followed him everywhere, the realization that happiness can't come from replacing love but from repairing it. I told him that forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it makes space for something new to grow. The air between us felt lighter than it had in years, filled with something fragile but real, hope. Later that evening, Lily joined us after her dance class. She came running in, full of laughter, and when she saw her dad sitting at the table with me, her face lit up like sunshine. She ran to him first, then to me, then pulled both our hands together and said, "Now it feels right again." That simple gesture, that tiny moment of pure innocence, healed something inside me that words never could. After dinner, we went outside and sat under the oak tree, the one that had witnessed every phase of our family's story. Lily sat between us, braiding the stems of dandelions into a little crown. Daniel looked around the yard and said it felt smaller than he remembered. I told him that's what happens when you grow up. The world doesn't shrink, but your heart learns where it truly belongs. He nodded, smiling quietly. For a long time, none of us spoke. We just listened to the sounds of evening, the wind, the crickets, the faint hum of life returning. When they left that night, Daniel hugged me for a long time. He didn't say anything dramatic, just whispered thank you for not giving up on me. I watched them drive away under the silver light of the moon, and for the first time in many years, I didn't feel the ache of loss. I felt peace, the kind that comes when love finds its way home after being lost for too long. That night, I wrote in my journal, not a letter this time, but a quiet reflection. I wrote that love is not always soft or easy. Sometimes it is patient, steady, waiting in silence until hearts are ready to listen again. And when that moment comes, all the pain fades into something beautiful, understanding. As I sit by my window tonight, the air cool and the world outside wrapped in gentle quiet, I realize how much life has changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in small, steady ways. The kind of changes you only notice when you pause long enough to look back. Daniel comes by often now. Sometimes he brings Lily. Sometimes he comes alone, just to sit and talk about his day or help me fix things around the house. The walls that once echoed with silence now carry laughter again. And though the past still lingers like an old scar, it no longer hurts to touch. When I think about everything we've lived through, the arguments, the distance, the years of stubborn pride, I understand something I couldn't before. Love isn't about who's right, who's wrong, or who says sorry first. Love is about who stays, even when staying hurts. It's about the quiet patience that endures when words fail, the kind that keeps a candle burning in the window for someone who may never return, and still hopes they do. I used to think forgiveness was a gift you give to others, but now I see it's something you give yourself first. It's the moment you stop asking why things happened and start asking what you can learn from them. It's when you choose peace over pain, even if the world tells you you'd be justified to stay angry. Because holding on to anger may make you feel strong for a moment, but letting it go, that's what makes you free. Lily taught me that children see the truth long before adults are ready to accept it. She never cared about blame or past mistakes, only about love, presence, and laughter. Watching her grow has reminded me that the heart doesn't heal through time alone. It heals through kindness, through moments shared, through choosing to love again, even when it's scary. Sometimes, when Daniel visits, we sit outside under the oak tree, just as we did years ago. The same branches that once shaded our sadness now cradle our peace. I often watch him and Lily together, the way he listens when she talks, the way she leans against him without fear. It makes me realize that healing is not about erasing the past, it's about rewriting its meaning. One evening, as we were watching the sunset, Daniel said quietly, "Mom, I finally understand what you meant when you said some lessons can't be learned until you lose something." I smiled and told him that loss is life's greatest teacher, but also its kindest if you're willing to listen. Because it strips away everything unnecessary and shows you what truly matters. And what truly matters is this: family is not perfect. Love is not constant ease. Forgiveness does not erase what was done. But through all of it, if we can choose to keep our hearts open, even just a little, miracles find their way in. I've come to believe that every heartbreak, every silence, every goodbye we think will break us, is really just a doorway. A doorway to becoming softer, wiser, and more human. Pain is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of understanding. So, if there's a moral to all of this, to my story, to Daniel's, to Lily's, it's this: never underestimate the power of quiet love. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't rush, doesn't demand. The kind that waits. Because sometimes, love's greatest strength isn't in how loud it can fight, but in how gently it endures. And when it endures long enough, it finds its way home every single time. Life has a way of breaking us just enough to teach us what really matters. I lost trust, I lost peace, and for a while, I even lost my son, but in the end, love found its way back, quietly and gently. If you're going through something heavy right now, remember, no storm lasts forever. Hold on to kindness, keep your heart open, and let time do its healing. If this real-life story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest.